Up until about 12 or so years ago, I believed in evolution. I was just like most people. I just thought that it was a given. It was taught in school as fact, as science, and I believed it. But something happened to me about 12 years ago that completely changed my perspective on whether or not I believed that to be fact. And I go into the things that happened to me about 12 years ago. I wouldn't say happened to me. Long story short, I made a stupid decision. I married the wrong person. We ended up getting a divorce. I became depressed. I started seeking God instead of self-medicating. And in this process of fasting a lot, I was probably fasting like, once or twice a week at very least. And in my word, like, an hour to 2 hours a day. And in this process that was just the way that I was coping with, the pain of, feeling like I had let a lot of people down, as someone that they looked up to spiritually. And God started revealing a lot of things to me. I was seeking some answers as to why things were so difficult for me relationally. But he started opening my eyes to what reality was. And that's one thing in life that I've learned, that we are not quite ready to walk into the next assignment that God has called us to until he opens up our eyes. It's kind of like that story of an army coming after the prophet Elisha, and his servant freaks out, and Elisha prays for God to open up his eyes, and God does, and the servant sees that the valley was full of angels surrounding the actual physical human army. And so sometimes we're not quite ready to receive our next assignment until God opens up our eyes a little bit more spiritually. And that's what happened to me about 12 years ago. So not only was God teaching me that we were in the end times, I was completely oblivious to that, but he also showed me that evolution was a lie. So one day I was on YouTube, just kind of like looking at some random stuff, Bible prophecy type things. And what came up was this teaching, this young earth creationism. And I immediately, I didn't even give it a thought. I scrolled past it. And I was like, it's so stupid. Because I honestly believed that the earth was billions of years old. I didn't want to feel like I was being uneducated by believing in a young earth. I had gone to a good school. I placed very well in high school academically. And so I didn't want to feel like I was being an uneducated person by believing in young earth creationism. And I just like scrolled past it, didn't even give it a thought. And I was very spiritually sensitive in that time, like I said, because I was fasting a lot, and Holy Spirit told me to go back. And so I go back to it, and I open it up, and I listened to maybe like the first 2 minutes of it. I was like, this is stupid. And I closed it again, and I just like went on about my business. And I kid you not, for the next few hours, Holy Spirit kept telling me that I needed to go back to that video. And I was like, why, Lord? Like, it's stupid. Why am I wasting my time on something like that? Holy Spirit kept saying, you need to go back. You need to go back. And so I went back, and I decided to approach it with a mindset of humility. And I listened. And the more I listened, the more the scales began to fall off my eyes when it came to evolution. The teacher was pointing out how evolution has been falsified in textbooks for years, for decades. He pointed out how the problems that believing in evolution creates, like the Big Bang Theory and, just how stars are formed. Like, I can't do it justice because I'm not a young earth creationist teacher. So I can't do that. You have to look, at like maybe Answers in Genesis or something like that, because I can't do this stuff justice. But suffice it to say that God used this video to completely get me away from evolution. Now I know that it's a lie. I'll tell you the most shocking thing about evolution. I believe that there was this man by the name of, I believe it's Charles Lyell, but he's often accredited with coming up with the theory of the geological columns, that different fossils sit at different layers, in the earth. But what's so shocking that I learned, in this teaching was that he didn't base it on any science. It was just a complete, just out of thin air theory. And to this day, they still hold to the theories more or less of what this guy came up with out of his head. And so that blew my mind. Like, wow, this is crazy. Like, really, when you take a close look at evolution, it doesn't really have two legs to stand on. For example, to this day, scientists still do not know, assuming evolution is true, they still do not know how inorganic material could produce life. They've tried to replicate that in laboratories. They can't do it. The truth is, it will never be figured out because it didn't happen that way, at least not naturalistically without God. But God played a major role in creating life, as we all know, and he formed humans from the ground. Literally, Adam means mud man, essentially, or a better way would be, so Adamah is earth, and Adam is earthling, and if you're going by the Hebrew. But yeah, that's essentially how I got away from believing in evolution. And really, when you think about it, one of the most theological difficulties that it presents if you're going to hold on to evolution is, how do you read Genesis? Is Genesis a myth? Is it just symbolism? Is it just a fairy tale? Is it fantasy? How do you read Genesis when you are an evolutionist, when you believe in evolution? And I was talking to someone who is a believer, who believes in evolution. And I wasn't being facetious or anything, but one question that really troubled me as someone who believed in evolution in that moment was, how can there be any death before the fall? I believe that one theological question completely shatters theistic evolution, which is believing that God orchestrated evolution. Theologically, how can you have death before the fall? And so it really just muddies the waters big time. But that's how I came to believe in young earth creationism. And once you accept that as the truth, a lot of science starts to make sense. And to this day, I look at science articles and I kind of chuckle to myself when they're trying to figure out something that is anti-Bible and they don't realize that they're going against the Bible. I think to myself, they're never going to figure it out. They're chasing their tails at this point. But I just wanted to post this video because perhaps there may be some people who are believers who were like me over 12 years ago, who believe in evolution. And I'm not saying that you're a bad person for believing in evolution. I'm not saying you're stupid or anything like that. I believe it's a process and it's something that God has to open up to you and show you. But I assure you with all conviction, with all my theological training, I've been a believer since I was 9 years old. I went to a liberal arts college and I got a religion degree. I also completed coursework in a seminary. I was an unofficial associate pastor for about 3 to 4 years, 5 years. So as someone who has had a lot of experiences and has approached faith from both perspectives, academically and spiritually, I can tell you that evolution is a lie from Satan, and it's just an attempt to get you to not believe in God. Because if you can believe that natural law created everything and everything's random and by chance, then it's very easy for you to make that next jump into believing that there's no God. And that's really the goal of the enemy by presenting humanity with this theory of evolution. And so, I just want to share this with everyone, and let me know what you think. If you still believe in evolution, again, I don't judge you. I'm curious to see how you are dealing with the theological difficulties that evolution presents. And if you don't believe in evolution, what is the one thing that kind of peeled back the curtains for you? Like, what was the one thing that imploded evolution for you? Let me know in the comments.